Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hi There with Rabbi Leah. I'm so glad you're joining me this morning, Wednesday morning. I owe you an apology that I didn't have a program for you the last 2 days. I've had a very hoarse voice, I think from overuse, from making a lot of phone calls to all of you, and from making these videos and talking a lot on the phone, and just kind of lost my voice. So I'm back and I want to start by singing with you. And you know my attitude. If you don't know the words, and even if you don't like to sing, you can always mumble, or you can hum, or you can say yai biddy bye bye, or you could do something. So we're going to sing together. Moda ani lefanecha, or Moda ani lefanecha if you're a woman. And this is the prayer that Jews say when they first open their eyes in the morning. Moda ani lefanecha, I am grateful before you, O God, because I woke up again this morning. And that's something definitely to be grateful for. So it goes like this. Moda ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam, שהחזרת בי נשמתי בחמלה, בחמלה, רבה אמונתך, רבה אמונתך. I couldn't hear you, but I know you were singing. So, over the last 10 days or so, since I've been at home and engaged in this process of uh, social distancing and isolating and so on, I've found I've had some really interesting conversations with myself. And I've also noticed that there are certain things that I'm really missing and craving. And I'm not talking about food cravings, I'm talking about human cravings. Um, I noticed that I am really, really yearning for some human interaction. So even with Zoom and FaceTime and the telephone and all these other miracles of technology that allow us to remain connected with one another, it is still not the same as being in the same physical space as somebody and being able to face interact with them. I'm sure we're all experiencing some of that to one degree or another right now, even if you've been in contact with family and friends. It's a hard time and it's very challenging. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I like my quiet time. I like coming home after work. I like having downtime. I like being able to enjoy time with my puppies. I love being able to read or bead or just sit and watch some mindless show on TV. But you all know that I'm also a pretty social human being. And in fact, my son has always been extremely annoyed at my habit of basically talking to strangers wherever I go. I can't ride up or down an elevator without making two or three friends. And once on an elevator in a hospital, he said to me, Mom, do you talk to everybody on the elevator? And pretty much I do. So, anyway, um, I do like the social engagement, and I'm finding what I really miss is the physical closeness of other people. Being able to hold a hand, give a hug, tap a shoulder. And I'm sure that that is not something that um, uh, I'm not the only one missing that kind of human interaction. So I notice, for example, when I go out for a walk with my dogs, which I try to do 2 or 3 times a day so that I can get out a little bit, I'll see neighbors and I'll always hope that there's going to be somebody out there that I can say hi to. And um, usually it's somebody I've seen before, but I may not know by name. And I wish I had the opportunity to really get up close and personal and talk to them, but of course I can't. And I started realizing something about myself that is a little bit hard to admit, but maybe it's something that you've experienced as well. I know that I, and possibly you, make pretty quick judgments about other people based upon how they look, what they're wearing, if they fit my concept of how a person should act. Maybe they have a strange tic or an annoying habit or something like that. And I'm prone to making a judgment. And it occurred to me that in doing so, I have probably dismissed or cut a lot of people out of my life who might have been incredibly interesting and wonderful people to get to know. So I've thought a lot about this, especially in this time of social distancing, when we can't get to know people and we can't interact with people, how that may change for me personally once this whole horrible period of time is over. So I have a poem that I'd like to read to you first, and then I'll make a few comments about it because it is a poem about someone who makes a judgment. You may have heard it before. I'm not going to tell you what the title is because that'll kind of give it away. But you may have either heard the poem before or you've heard it done in the form of a story. But I'm going to read it for you now, and then we'll discuss it a little bit, not face to face, but I'll share some ideas. A woman was waiting at an airport one night with several long hours before her flight. She hunted for a book in the airport shop, bought a bag of cookies, and found a place to drop. She was engrossed in her book, but happened to see that the man beside her, as bold as could be, grabbed a cookie or two from the bag between, which she tried to ignore to avoid a scene. She munched cookies and watched the clock as this gutsy cookie thief diminished her stock. She was getting more irritated as the minutes ticked by, thinking, if I wasn't so nice, I'd blacken his eye. And with each cookie she took, he took one too. And when only one cookie was left, she wondered what he would do. With a smile on his face and a nervous laugh, he took the last cookie and broke it in half. He offered her half as he ate the other, and she snatched it from him and thought, oh, brother, this guy has some nerve and he's also rude. Why, he didn't even show any gratitude. She had never known when she had been so galled, and sighed with relief when her flight was called. She gathered her belongings and headed for the gate, refusing to look back at the thieving ingrate. She boarded the plane and sank in her seat, then sought her book, which was almost complete. As she reached in her baggage, she gasped with surprise. There was her bag of cookies in front of her eyes. If mine are here, she moaned, with despair, then the others were his, and he tried to share. Too late to apologize, she realized with grief that she was the rude one, the ingrate, the thief. So the poem is called The Cookie Thief, and it's by Valerie Cox. And who knows, maybe it's something that really happened. Maybe it's something she made up, but it really doesn't matter. I think the message is so interesting. And that is that she jumped to conclusions. She made a judgment about this guy who was just taking her cookies and put up with it and was annoyed by it and didn't say anything and just allowed herself to become more and more irate, and then realized too late that she had judged him completely incorrectly, that she was actually eating the cookies out of his bag instead of the other way around. And unfortunately, because they had not made a connection of any kind other than sharing this bag of cookies, um, she was unable to apologize or thank him or laugh about it or anything like that. So I've thought a lot about the ways in which I sometimes do that as well. And I think it's human to do. So I'm not going to beat myself up too much about it, but it is something that I'm considering and hope that I can think about seriously and possibly change. So I want to share two experiences with you. One, not mine, but an anecdote I heard, kind of about this sort of a situation. And then the other one, something that I experienced myself that was just a kind of a mind-blowing and really life-changing experience. The first is an interview that I saw yesterday with Anderson Cooper and the son of an author who passed away from COVID-19. And the man was probably in his early to mid 50s. His father, whose name I don't recall, but I will get it for you, had written a book about New York. This guy had walked 6,000 miles around New York, the city. And he had written a book about all of his experience and all the people that he had met during the years that it took him to do this. Um, Evidently, the book is fascinating, and as soon as I get the title of it and the author, I will share it with you. But one of the things that this gentleman said about his father was that he never met anybody that he didn't engage in conversation and try to get to know, even if that interaction was momentary, minutes, or maybe it was hours, but that he spent this entire process of walking around the city of New York, getting to know people, and most of them, the kind of people that he probably never would have gotten to know had he not done this. And in talking about his father, the gentleman said that he never met anybody who his father didn't consider a friend because he really got to know on a human to human basis who this person was. And I thought, I would never be courageous enough to do that. As outgoing as I am, as social as I am, as much as I love people, I don't think that I could just walk around a city, 6,000 miles of walking. First of all, I wouldn't be able to do that. But barring the physical difficulty of doing that, to be able to go up to virtual strangers and make friends with them, I think is a talent and a gift that is as rare as this guy who wrote the book. But wouldn't it be amazing if we didn't have to go that far? If we were able to simply get to meet people, not pass judgment, not try to immediately tell a book by its cover, and really identify the humanity in other people, I think we would probably all have many, many more friends than we currently have in our lives. The second story I want to tell you, or the second experience I want to share with you, is something that I experienced as a congregational rabbi. I used to take our sophomore confirmation class to Washington, D.C. for a very special program called Letaken Ha'olam, to repair the world. And this program would get approximately 300 to 400 high school students, usually juniors and seniors, from a Thursday through a Monday in Washington, D.C. And the program was run by the RAC, the Religious Action Center, which is the social justice arm of the Reform Jewish movement. And the program was really an amazing program. These kids would all fly in from all over the country, beginning with a program on Thursday night. They would work all day Friday and study all day Friday, then celebrate Shabbat with each other. They would have Havdalah at the Lincoln Memorial, which was just amazing. Work all day Sunday again. And then on Monday, I'll tell you in a minute what they would do. So the purpose of the program was for these kids to identify various issues of social justice through a Jewish lens. And through the use of speakers and presentations and readings and text, they would explore what Judaism has to say about just about everything you can imagine, from the environment to disparity in wages, to women's rights, to rights for the differently able, to LGBTQ issues, to I said ecology already, right? To animal rights. I mean, you name it. And they would be introduced to these different subjects through speakers and through their own work, reading, discussing, various exercises that they would do, and so on. Very interesting program. On a Sunday, they would break into, each congregation would have a group of kids there, and then they would break into smaller groups, and they would delve more deeply into one of the issues that really resonated with them. And then and they would create a presentation. And on Monday, the kids went to Capitol Hill and they had appointments with their US senators and their US representatives in Congress, and they would stand and do presentations on these various issues related to the way in which Jews approach social justice. Of course, Israel was in there as well. I did not mean to skip Israel. So it was amazing to see the metamorphosis that took place in these 15 and 16-year-old kids between Thursday night, when they were all giddy and excited to be there, and Monday, when they walked into their senators and representatives' offices and stood there in suits and ties and dresses and pantsuits and gave these. You didn't know who these kids were. There was such an incredible transformation. The first night of the program, they do a very interesting presentation called Faces of Homelessness. And Washington, D.C., along with so many other major metropolitan areas, has a terrible, terrible problem with homelessness. Certainly, we see it here in the greater San Diego area. We certainly know it exists in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Detroit, Chicago, you name it. No big city, and small cities as well. None of them are free of this scourge of homelessness. And it is, in fact, one of the issues of social justice which the kids study during that weekend. So there were three speakers, all of whom either were or had been homeless at one point in their lives. And I want to talk about two of those. The first one, who had a huge impact on me, was a woman who was probably in her late 30s, early 40s. She had a job. She had an apartment. She had a car. She was living a wonderful life. And then she was diagnosed with cancer. And as a result of the cancer and the fact that she was missing so much work due to her treatments, she lost her job. And this was before the time where there was a Family Medical Leave Act. She went on Medicaid. She continued her treatments, but she was not able to pay her rent. She was not able to make her car payments, and she ended up living on the streets. And as she told this story, we began to realize that her homeless story was one that could really be a story that could be any of us, because she certainly didn't plan on losing everything she had because of this disease. She was able to, after her treatments were over, work again. She began to save some money. She was once again able to rent an apartment. She had a roommate. I think she said she got a car again, and things were going very well for her for quite some time. And then she found out her identity had been stolen. Evidently, this roommate had been opening her mail, and at that time, you probably remember, every other piece of mail was some sort of a solicitation for a credit card. He had been opening them up, applying for the credit cards, and charging everything, and it was going to her. And when she found out about it, he had accumulated tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt. And once again, she lost everything and ended up living on the street. So we got to see this woman who, really by no fault of her own, who had who wasn't expecting to get cancer or have a roommate who, by the way, took off and they couldn't find him. She really was uh, so destitute as a result of this and living on the street. And yet, she was the kind of person that most likely you or I would have walked right by and made a judgment about. She's lazy. She's a drug addict. She doesn't want to work. She's only going to take the money I give her and go buy booze or cigarettes. And I know I've had those thoughts. I'm ashamed that I have, but I know that I have. And I think I am not alone in that. So the kids were beginning to really understand some of these judgments they make about people, just on the surface, without really having had any opportunity to know their story, to know who they are, what their lives are really about. The other speaker who really, really moved me was an African American gentleman, who came out dressed wearing probably every item of clothing that he owned. Washington, D.C. in February, which is what it was this particular year, it can be quite chilly. And he had on a down jacket under which he had a zip up hoodie. And you could see he had a sweater and then a flannel shirt. He was wearing a hat. He had very long dreadlocks, probably hadn't cut his hair in years. And he was wearing some pretty ratty looking boots on his feet. And he had a pair of what looked like, not snow pants, but insulated pants. And underneath, you could see the hems of another pair of pants hanging out of the bottom. So he got up and introduced himself, and he told us his story. He had been an A student in high school, a valedictorian of his class. He had lettered in 2 varsity sports, football and basketball. He had a scholarship to a number of different universities and accepted one of them. And at 18, he went off to school. And unfortunately, he admittedly fell in with a bad crowd, got hooked on drugs, lost his scholarships, failed out of school, and ended up living on the street. And you could tell by looking at him that he was probably a man in his late 30s. So this wasn't a news story. He had been living his life in this condition for quite some time. And he talked about how he had gotten clean and then how he had gotten into drugs again, and that this had been kind of a cycle. And it was getting a little warm in the ballroom that we were in with these 400 people, and his story was quite moving and emotional. And you could see that he was starting to perspire. And he said to the group, would anybody mind if I took my jacket off? And so he unzipped his his down jacket and he took it off. And he continued to talk about his life and his experience and the fact that, he had been the victim of judgment by hundreds of people who saw him and made all kinds of assumptions about who he was now and why he had gotten there, even though he had had a whole different life prior to his drug addiction. As he proceeded to talk, he started to take off additional pieces of clothing. He removed his hoodie. He removed his sweater. He removed the flannel shirt. And underneath, he had a dress shirt on. And he had a tie on. He removed the insulated pants. And underneath, he was wearing a pair of dress pants. Removed his gloves. Removed his these cruddy boots that he had on. And you could see that he was wearing a pair of polished wingtip shoes. And then finally, he removed his hat and his wig. And we come to find out that the wig was, the dreadlocks were actually a wig. And there standing in front of us is this very attractive, incredibly professional looking African-American gentleman who, if you had seen him that way, you would have made a completely different judgment about who he was. Turns out that he was not an actor, that he was actually that young valedictorian who had become a drug addict, who had gone into rehab and failed several times, but who now was a recovering drug addict. And he was the Washington, D.C. director of the organization that works to fight homelessness in Washington, D.C. So, an organizational executive. And I have to say there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Everybody was crying. We couldn't believe it. And we realized that this is what we do to people. We look at them and we immediately make judgments about them. The kids were really moved by it, and so was I. And it was an experience that I had many years ago, but something that I will never forget. So whether you are dealing with a cookie thief or seeing a homeless woman on the street and wondering what her story is, or seeing a gentleman with dreadlocks and nasty looking clothes, you just never know somebody's story. And my experience over the last 10 days in being socially isolated has been that I really have a craving for human connection. And I also realize that there are so many people out there in this world that I don't know, that I would like to get to know and would like to hold my judgments in abeyance so that I really have an opportunity to connect with their humanity, with who they really are, not with their clothes, not with their gestures, not with their appearance, but really with who they are as human beings. So that is my hope for myself. And when we come out on the other end of this horrible thing that we're all experiencing, God willing, we'll all be a little bit kinder, a little bit less judgmental, and we just have to remember the cookie thief, and we'll all be fine. So that's my message for today, and I'm sticking to it. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow morning for another episode of Hi There with Rabbi Leah. Don't forget to tune in at 9:30 on channel 1390. I'll be seeing you tomorrow and Friday, and then again Friday night for blessings, Saturday morning for Shabbat services at 10 o'clock, and Saturday afternoon for Shabbat Chaverim, during which I'm going to be talking about Pesach, but bringing you some unusual things about Passover that I hope you don't already know, so that we can make it interesting. Again, I'm not going to say goodbye. I'm going to say lehitraot. I'll see you later. I love you all, and I miss you very much. Can't wait to see you again. Bye-bye.